Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace, calling North America to repentance and revival.
Welcome back to the Corner of Truth and Courage. You're listening to Fortress of Faith. This is Tom Wallace. And today and this week, the continuation of this week, I want to focus on what's coming up here next week, 9/11, our anniversary of the attack on America by Islamic terrorists. And I want to try to break down for you so you understand where they're coming from, why they did what they did, why they are still capable and desirous to do what they did back in 2001. They still have the same mission. They haven't finished. They have not forgotten. And we need to be prepared. You know, it's the old saying, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. So we need to have information of understanding. Why is it that Islam, now I'm not saying Muslims, but Islam desires for our destruction? And it's simple. It goes back to our first struggle in America with Islam, back when our nation was being formed. You go back in history, America's first foreign war, after we fought for our war for independence, we had a war against Muslims. It was called the Barbary Pirate Wars. Muslims were attacking and taking our ships and crew, holding them for ransom around the Mediterranean as they got to the northern parts of Africa, countries like Libya and so on. There were attacking our vessels and holding them for ransom. They were not doing it just to Americans. They were doing it to the Europeans as well. In fact, there's a long history of it, many years were they doing it. Our second president had to deal with it, John Adams, and he paid the ransoms, and it was almost bankrupting our treasury until Thomas Jefferson became president. While he was our foreign ambassador, he went to London to meet with the Algerian foreign minister in London, and he explained to us why Muslims are doing this. It's not personal. We're ordered by our God to make war with those who are not Muslim, who do not accept our God, Allah. And so he bought 2 folios of the Quran. They were in 2 volumes back then. Brought them home, started reading it, started studying it, and realized the only way to deal with this is not pay ransom. You only encourage them to do more. You got to send in an army. And thus he started the Marines. This is where the Marines get started. That's why they're called the leathernecks, by the way. Why? Because they protected their necks because the Muslims were going after them with the swords. You know, so this is in the late 1700s, early 1800s. You know, so we realized you've got to fight this. The only way you're going to deal with the sword of Islam is not pacify them, not appease them. They only take your land and take your money that way. You've got to fight fire with fire. And the Europeans learned from the Americans how to deal with that. And thus, they also were able to free themselves from the shackles that Muslims were enslaving. You may not realize this. There are over 1 million. You read the French writings on this. We Americans are very ignorant of what happened in history. There's much written in the French records of over 1 million white people who were enslaved by Africans, by Muslim Africans. By the way, who do you think captured the slaves from the interior and brought them to the shores to sell them to the Europeans and later to the Americans as slaves, the black slaves? It was the Muslims that did this. They had captured people that were non-Muslim and brought them and sold them and made ransom for them. And that's part of the teaching of Islam, to make them demis and to profit off their backs. That's what chapter 9 is all about in the Quran. But what brought about the modern terrorist that we're dealing with today? Well, we have to go back to about 1920. around that time, World War I came to completion, and it brought in the end of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was the last caliphate of Islam. And there are about 300 million Muslims still left in the world. Islam had suffered because of some of the battles that it had occurred prior to that in the last 100 years. Mismanagement by the Ottomans, by the caliphate. They didn't modernize. But they had also made some serious mistakes within their religion. They started changing their doctrines and picking and choosing what parts of the Quran that they wanted to follow and leaving the rest to say, well, that belongs in the 7th century, doesn't belong for us today. And so the clerics started reforming the religion and making it a little bit more peaceful and only following the peaceful passages and rejecting the militant passages and only teaching the peaceful stuff. So the new Muslims that were coming around in the 1800s were slipping away from the original teachings. And so because of this reforming of Islam, it weakened it, because Islam only works with the sword, with fear. If you remove the fear, if you remove the militant side of Islam, it falls apart. It doesn't really work. Thus, the Ottoman Empire was slipping and crumbling and falling away because they were trying to move away from the sword. And it created a catastrophe for them. So when in the 1920s, when the Ottoman Empire came to a close, there were 3 fundamental movements that tried to regain the Islamic world. One was in Egypt, where we had the largest number of Arabs. The other was in Saudi Arabia, where we had, the home of Islam from Muhammad. And the group over there, we call them the Wahhabis. The group in Egypt was a movement by al-Banna. We'll talk about him here in a moment. Hussein al-Banna. He started what we know today as the Muslim Brotherhood. And then you had a movement in Persia, and that is with the Shiites up there, and that later became taking over Iran, or the birth of Iran. And so, but a lot of these movements began back in the 1920s. 50 years later, in the 70s, really, that's when it started rippling across the world. That's when we began noticing it, especially from Persia. But there were some things that were going on during World War II that happened in Egypt. And I want to bring your attention to the Muslim Brotherhood. I still believe today, and I've said this many, many times, I think the most dangerous terrorist organization on the face of this globe was not Al-Qaeda, was not ISIS, even though they were the most ruthless and very, they got a lot of press and created a great problem for us there. But the biggest and the most dangerous terrorist organization is the Muslim Brotherhood. And the reason why I call them the most dangerous is because they do not make it clear that they are for the sword. They try to act like diplomats. They try to act like politicians. Their method is covert. They come in like a Trojan horse. And once they get within the countries, then they start peddling their poison and trying to destroy nations from within. They learned, I think, and this is why I call them the most dangerous, is because they're the most clever. They're not out there outwardly with guns and bombs. Now, parts of them are. They birthed Hamas. Hamas is very clear. That's where we're going to put the guns and bombs against Israel. They exist purely for the front on the fight against Israel. That's the Muslim Brotherhood fight against Israel through Hamas. But through the other sides, they work as politicians, as diplomats, as lawyers, bankers, and they infiltrate the rest of the world that way. But during World War II, we had a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood led by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. And they teamed up. There's lots of pictures of this. You may not realize that, but there were SS divisions in Hitler's army that were Muslims. You had 2 SS divisions in the Balkans. They had the fez, remember, the red fez hat that they would wear over in Turkey and so on there, like the Ottoman Empire used to wear. Well, they would have, the symbol of Islam and the swastika on their fez. There's a number of pictures if you see them. You see the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. This is the Muslim Brotherhood meeting with Hitler. And you see numbers of pictures of the Mufti inspecting the soldiers, the Nazi soldiers, and you see him with Goebbels and all this. Why? What was the connection of Islam and Hitler? Well, they had the same goal: the annihilation of Jews and global domination. And they believed that once they had the upper edge and taken care of all their enemies, then the Muslims felt we will be able to take Hitler down, and Hitler believed we'll be able to take the Muslims down. We have a common enemy, so let's deal with them first, wipe them out, and then we'll sort out our issues afterwards. Tomorrow when we come back, I want to get into Al-Qaeda and show you how that developed and how it led up to 9/11 as we prepare for the anniversary of the attack of Islamic terrorists on our nation coming up next week. Well, that's going to be it for today. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow at the Corner of Truth and Courage. God bless you. I have an urgent and heartfelt request that we hope will touch your hearts. Underground churches are growing in Iran, and there are brave individuals who have chosen to follow their faith and become pastors. Yet they have not had any formal training. These pastors, however, face tremendous challenges in pursuing their calling. I'm flying to Turkey to meet with other missionaries and to teach Bible doctrine to these pastors and to mentor them in biblical ministry. Now get this, for only $200, these Iranian pastors can travel by bus to neighboring Turkey. Our goal is to bring 30 pastors on this journey to equip them with the knowledge and skills they need to properly feed their flocks. Imagine the impact your donation can make. Your generosity can transform lives from one of the darkest corners of the world, Iran. Please open your hearts and give today. Your donation, whether big or small, can make an incredible difference. You can give today at our website, fortressoffaith.com. That's fortressoffaith.com, or call us at 800-616-0082. Again, that's 800-616-0082. Thank you for your compassion, and thank you for making a real difference in the lives of these brave pastors.